In this video, I'm going to be going through the Chapter 9, Test 1, Solving Quadratic Equations review homework. So the first one says, which function has x-intercepts 7, 0 and negative 1, 0? So this tells you that the x-intercepts mean that x is equal to 7 and x is equal to negative 1. So this is kind of working backwards from actually solving. So here we're given the answer. So now we're going to work backwards to figure out what the factors were before it was solved. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. And I get x minus 7 is equal to 0. Then to work backwards for this one, I would move this constant of 1 over. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And I get x plus 1 equals 0. So my two factors are x minus 7 and x plus 1. Okay, those would have been my two factors. So x minus 7 and x plus 1 would be B. The next problem says, what are the zeros of the following function? So here we're given the function and we need to find the zeros. So f of x, we're going to set equal to 0. We're going to replace with a 0. Okay, and then we're going to solve this. Now, like you know, the first thing we should check to do is see if it's factorable, to see if we can solve with factoring. So I'm going to go ahead and do my big X to factor this. A times C on top, B on the bottom. This is A, B, C. So A times C is 1 times negative 20, which is negative 20. B is a positive 1. The two numbers that multiply to be negative 20 and add to be positive 1 would be 5 and negative 4. So my two factors are x plus 5 and x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, but it says what are the zeros, not what are the factors. So I'm going to have to actually solve this. So I have x plus 5 equals 0, and then I have x minus 4 equals 0 as well. So I took each of the factors, set them both equal to 0. And then I'm going to solve each equation. So I get negative 5 and 4, which would be D. Okay, the next problem is a word problem. So it says, you have 125 square feet of fabric to make a circular play parachute for kids. What is the radius of the largest parachute you could make and then round to the nearest 1/10 of a foot? Okay, so here we're given the formula for area of a circle. We know that we have 125 square feet, so that's our area. We know that that's what we have. Okay, and it says, what is the radius? So that's what we're going to try to find. So we're going to solve for the radius here. So to isolate this r squared, I'm going to divide both sides by pi. 125 divided by pi, you can use the pi button in your calculator or just 3.14. You get roughly 39.81. Okay, and then now to solve this, I want to get the r by itself here. So I really want to take the square root of both sides, okay, to undo this squared piece here. So the square root of 39.81 would be plus or minus 6.3. Okay. So r is equal to 6.3 and r is equal to negative 6.3. Okay, now think about your answer here. This is a real world problem. So a radius is 6.3 and then a radius of negative 6.3. A radius is a distance, so you can't have negative distance. So the only answer here would be the positive 6.3 feet. Okay, the negative answer doesn't make sense because radius is a distance and distance cannot be negative. All right, number 4 says solve using any method and then when necessary round to the nearest 100th. So I'm going to think through my flow chart. Here's the flow chart to remind you. First thing is that it has to be in standard form equal to 0, which it is. Can you easily factor? It does have a GCF of 2, so you could factor it. However, before I even started looking at my flow chart, I noticed that I would probably want to do square root method here. And the reason I would want to do square root method is because it's missing that B term, that middle term, that BX term here in the middle. Okay, again, you could factor, but I'm going to do square root method instead. So I'm going to isolate the x squared. So I'm going to add 50 to both sides. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So x squared is equal to 25. Now that I have the x squared isolated, I'm going to square root both sides. So x is equal to positive or negative 5. Remember, when you take the square root of a positive real number, you have to include your positive negative sign there. Okay? Or you could have factored that one. Either method would get you the same answer. Okay, for number 5, I'm also going to use square root method. I'm going to go ahead and write that here so you guys can see which one I use. Square root method. Which method would you use here to solve? I'm going to use square root method here again, like I was just saying. And the reason I'm going to use square root method for this one is because I have that set of parentheses squared. Okay, so if you see that set of parentheses squared, I would do square root method. So I'm going to isolate this set of parentheses by subtracting 6 from both sides. I have 1/2 times x minus 3 squared equals 25. To get rid of this fractional coefficient of 1/2, I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. So I'll have x minus 3 squared equals 50. Now that this is isolated, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of x minus 3 squared is just x minus 3. The square root of 50 is positive or negative 7.07. But I'm not just going to leave my answer like this. I'm going to break it apart, and I'm going to have x minus 3 equals positive 7.07, and x minus 3 equals negative 7.07. Okay, positive and negative from this right here. Then I'm going to solve both of these. So I get negative 4.07 and 10.07. Again, I use square root method because it has that pair of grouping symbols squared. For the next one, again, I think through my flow chart, it is set equal to 0, so that's good. I'm going to look to see if I can factor it. There are no numbers that multiply to be 13 and add to be 10, so I can't factor it. Okay, I can't factor it. Is it missing the bx term? No, it's not missing the bx term. It has a middle term right here. Okay, so then you're left between completing the square method or quadratic formula. I personally think that quadratic formula is the easier one between these two, and quadratic formula always works. Okay, so if you can't do the first two, I would focus on doing quadratic formula. If you like completing the square, then by all means you can do that. But again, I think quadratic formula is easier. So that's what we're going to do here is quadratic formula. And the reason we're doing quadratic formula is because you can't factor. And bx is not missing. Okay, so you can't factor it, and that bx middle term is not missing. So I'm going to do quadratic formula. So first I'm going to state what a, b, and c are just to keep myself organized. A is 1, b is 10, and c is 13. I'm going to go ahead and find the discriminant first, which is that b squared minus 4ac part of your formula. So remember the quadratic formula is this formula here. So I'm going to be finding this piece right here under the square root symbol. So b squared minus 4ac. So I'm kind of just doing plug and chug here. So b squared would be 10 squared minus 4ac. Okay, that would be 100. Okay. Minus 4 times 13, which would be 52. 100 minus 52 would be 48. Okay, so that right there is our discriminant. And since this is a positive 48, that means I'm going to have two answers, two solutions. So now I'm going to do my quadratic formula. X equals negative b. Negative b would be negative 10. Plus or minus the discriminant, the square root of the discriminant, which was 48. all over 2 times a, which is 1. So this is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 48 gives me 6.93 all over 2. So I'm going to break this apart. And I really have negative 10 plus 6.93 divided by 2 and negative 10 minus 6.93 divided by 2. Okay, and when you solve those, you get x is equal to negative 1.54 and x is equal to negative 8.47.